Warning, this podcast may contain reference to abuse of both a violent and sexual nature. This may also contain some opinions which people do find unsavory or just plainly irritating. Thank you for listening.
And that should be us live.
Excellent. So, what questions do you have?
I guess we should probably start off with, what's your name and what are your pronouns?
Well, my name is Ryan Petrie. I go by he, they pronouns, and I am a local writer and novelist.
And I'm Ray, and I am a local director and editor. And pronouns are he, him.
Excellent. So, really, what I was hoping to talk about, most importantly, is the activism that's currently going on in Britain, and in the wider world, actually, Western society as a whole, and how the fact of really we need to, for want of a better word, we need to basically step the fuck up. Very much so. Especially, most importantly, the one I want to talk about right now is eco-activism. Because currently, as is seen on the news in very small snippets, the world is essentially on fire.
Literally in some places.
Literally in some places. Like the Gulf of Mexico, that pipe rupture that caught fire, the sea is literally a fiery, bubbling soup. And no one is paying attention to it. It's not even on the news. I've not seen any bit of it on the news, which is kind of frightening.
Yeah, I've seen it pop up here and there on social media.
Social media,
in
definitely.
the case of understandably, the pandemic and that's quite a dangerous thing, but we personally, the both of us live in Scotland, so all I'm seeing is that England is going to release its lockdown, and nothing about the wider world, nothing about what's going on in Canada, what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico, none of that.
Definitely not. But even though we should be paying attention to these things, because Canada and most of the northwestern hemisphere of America was in a heat dome. People have died in this heat dome, and it's tragic, but it's the fact of no one is recognizing this, and something needs to be done, definitely. And world leaders actually also need, in the words of a Drag Race queen, they need to step their pussy up, and they need to do it quickly. And it's actually something I really do want to mention. I have it here in my notes, is the manipulation that we've been experiencing of the elder generation, especially of children, especially of the children who have said, we need to do something. And the elder generations, from my perspective, they've been ignoring them, which is a very, very weird thing for them to do, essentially, because all those adults have ever said is, we're doing this for our children. And if they were doing this for their children, they wouldn't be doing it at all.
They'd step up. I mean, I can understand because I come from a very low class kind of upbringing, and it's a case of they do, I hear a lot of, I did what I could for my kids and that kind of thing, in a lot of cases. And it makes sense for, yeah, sure, if you're struggling to even pay the bills, there's not much you can do. But if you're sitting there as the CEO of a company and you're like, I'm doing everything that I do for the sake of my kids, then why are you still hoarding so much money? Because your kids aren't going to be able to put that to use if society ends up collapsing under the weight of ecological destruction.
And it was Greta Thunberg, actually, that made me think about it, because she said, all I ever hear about is how we have hope. And she said, I don't want your hope. I want your fear. And basically, that's what I want. I want people shitting themselves, essentially, because we need to be. Because right now, ecologically, environmentally, governments and the higher-ups have been sitting very complacently. Like, they've been raking in all this money. Yes, the world is all fine and dandy for them, but it's not fine and dandy for those, not only in Western society, but also in the third world countries, who are suffering. And they suffer terribly. And the heat dome in America and in Canada, that's also proof that significant changes are actually happening to our environment. Like, the last time there was this much heat, I believe, was quite a substantial amount of millions of years ago. And say, take for example the Cretaceous period, by around about the time the dinosaurs vanished. So our world was basically choking to death.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was heating up. There was substantial volcanic activity all around the world. There was a very venomous and poisonous gas layer that formed very close to the ground. So anything smaller would essentially suffocate. And so I don't know if you remember Walking with Dinosaurs.
Vaguely.
Right, so there was the episode, it was the very last episode, it was the T-Rex, and it was scavenging for food. And it lowers its head to the ground. So this is like a 5-ton, nearly 14-meter predator.
Yeah.
It lowered its head to the ground. And literally, the moment it lowers its head, it feels the effect. It's trying to shake itself off, because if it topples over, it will never again get up. It would literally die.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe our current timeline hasn't got any poisonous gases forming close to the ground. However, but we can envision ourselves in a very dystopian future if we don't do what is right now. If governments don't step up, because the UN report said we've got 30 years. We don't have 30 years.
Like, we have 30 years. So, we might have 30 years to fix things if things got in motion right now. But, I mean, I can't say all my life as if it's a big thing. I mean, I'm Gen Z, so I'm, pretty young in everything at the moment. But all of my life, I've heard that we've got, in the next 30 years, this will be done to help curb global warming. In the next... And I'm coming up to, I am my mid-20s now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, other than iPhones coming into existence, I haven't really seen very much. I mean, electric cars have become a little bit more popular, but I mean, I when I was about 5-6 years old and just starting primary school, I imagined a future where it's. I mean, I was always a massive dreamer on that, hence why I went into directing and movies and that kind of thing.
Same as me as a writer.
Yeah. But I imagined a world where humans, a bit of an egotist here, humans had control over everything. Like, the environment itself was fine-tuned to never run rampant. That we would find a way of making sure that the world stayed alright, and that animals and that would be able to survive, even if in, synthetic areas or something, everything would still be able to continue living and functioning and going on as is. But all I've seen is pretty much the opposite. I've seen, I've seen Texas, in comparison to here, the hottest place I could think of, kind of thing. Like, when I think of Texas, I think of that stereotypical, kind of skull with the horns out in just a blank desert kind of thing.
And a tumbleweed just rolling
around. That's what I think of when I think Texas. Turning into the Arctic. Back the winter just passed.
Mm-hmm.
That is terrifying to have such a polar shift.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we get that here being right in the middle of a tropical and a glacial water zone. We get extreme shifts anyway, and we don't get that.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrifying to look at, and it's terrifying to see people go, "Oh, it's okay, we've got 30 years." And it's like, no, you had 30 years to start 30 years ago. This is your last day to start. Yeah. Otherwise, you're never getting there.
No. And I actually, it upsets me in a lot of ways, because my wee cousin just had a baby in December, my niece. And I just think, I shudder to think about what's the world she's going to grow up in.
Mm-hmm.
And it just and not to be a doomsayer, it's more the case of people who can have children, they might as well just not, because there's no... Essentially, it feels like there's no hope.
Yeah.
Because we're hoping too much. We need to be shit scared about what's going to happen, because when we are scared, we do things.
Yeah.
But when we have hope, we wait.
Yeah.
But we don't have the time to wait. 30 years is our time limit to do something. We need to start today. Because if we start 30 years down the line, when I'm essentially 55, there'd be no point.
Yeah.
Everything we ever hoped we could be, things that you and I dreamed we could be, say, like that Star Trek generation, where everything would be the same, where everything was equal. When we moderated, we
Yeah.
could change it.
Didn't matter who you were,
Exactly.
as long as you were you.
Exactly. And there was respect and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And also how they managed global warming. They stopped it. They were able to stop that.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist. So it just reminds me of that television show Terra Nova. I don't know if you ever watched that.
Yes, I remember that. The general from James Cameron's Avatar playing
Yes.
another general.
Yes, but a good guy this time.
Yeah, fantastic actor. But
Absolutely. But no, it like desert bound. Oxygen is at its lowest, and they go back. They build this sort of sci-fi portal to take them back to like the early Cretaceous to start again. Essentially, it's a great idea because there is less carbon. There's more oxygen, which you would have to get used to.
yeah.
Because very fun fact, about 300 million years ago, there was much more oxygen, substantially more oxygen on Earth than there's ever been. So say a lightning struck in a forest, that would ignite
Yeah.
a fire, and it would cause forest fires. It also caused insects to be huge.
Yes, giant scorpions. and that
Giant
kind of thing.
scorpions, spiders, and the very famous Scottish discovery, Arthropleura.
Oh.
Distant relative of modern millipedes. Long as a car, though.
Ooh.
Vegetarian, but it's tall enough to rear you right in the eye. And
Yeah.
would give you a very nasty bite because they had some very powerful jaws.
Damn.
But no, ecologically, environmentally, we need to do things because I feel that the world as a whole, especially Western society, we don't like what inconveniences us.
Mhm.
We would much rather suffer than actually take the minor inconvenience and go through. It was the same with the masks during the pandemic. They would much rather not wear them than actually wear them and grin and bear it because it was the right thing to do.
There was one example that I actually heard from because being a director, I'm still quite a big gamer and I'm always interested in games. A massive set of parallels that were being drawn from a few people I know that was hilarious was in the MMO World of Warcraft. There was a plague that basically people, to stop this plague from spreading, had to stay separate from each other. And something with the CDC in America, they pointed out that look, this kind of thing could happen. And it was written off as humans would never be that selfish.
We are.
Kick off 2020, and suddenly almost everyone that sat there and went, this is what could happen if we don't, if we aren't willing to inconvenience ourselves for a couple of weeks kind of thing, this will happen. And they're like, oh, humans would totally never be that ridiculous. They'd always do the right thing. Suddenly, a lot of people did do the right thing. And that's a chronic asthmatic. I appreciate every single one of you that went out there, got vaccinated when the vaccines came out, wore your masks, social
Absolutely.
distance.
Same here as another chronic asthmatic.
Yeah.
The big problem was, especially in Britain, my big problem was the bulldog spirit that we went into this, that we would fight this through, we will get through this.
Very World War II.
It is, yes, and I actually have a lot of arguments with people about this. I actually argued with my own mother about it, is how Britain essentially fetishizes its war history, especially that of World War II. We are living off of a fund of nostalgia, essentially, for the Second World War, because we've always seen it as our finest hour.
I will very much, I'll even put up my hands, and I think it was you that ended up actually educating me on this and that kind of thing, because I always used to, I look back and was like, we fought in World War II, we did all this, we did all that, and then I think it was you that pointed out that, but look at how much that didn't change us. It's still, like, the man that more or less won us the war, that saved the world, pretty much was killed due to the laws against being gay back then. And Alan Turing, for any of you who don't know,
chemically castrated.
Yeah, and among other things, it took so long for black people to get rights and that. You'd think that after looking at fascism, a human embodiment of everything that we need to change in the world, and fighting against that, you'd have thought that immediately after we would have looked at ourselves and gone, we don't want this to happen again. Let's sort things out. Nearly 100 years later, I mean, I'm still seeing people in the streets be beat up for. I mean, I'm a goth. I'm a straight cis white guy, so I have literally no other reason to get beat up in the streets other than I'm a goth.
Mm-hmm.
And I get abuse. I can't imagine the kind of abuse. All I would have to do to stop this abuse is wear a different outfit.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine what it's like for.
It's you essentially what they're saying is, in order to not be beat up, to not be a victim, is to surrender your identity.
Yeah.
So well, like you were saying, being a straight cis white male, but you're also a goth. Well, remember the case of Sarah Lancaster, that poor girl.
Sophie.
It was Sophie Lancaster. Thank you. And she was literally just going out with her boyfriend, and they were both attacked. And sadly, Sophie was murdered.
Indeed.
Horribly murdered.
Heart goes out to the family.
Exactly.
Still
definitely
doing amazing things for alternative communities, but taking into account the fact that, again, like, although I refuse to, all I would need to do is change how I dress and look. Gay people, black people, trans people,
we can.
It's not like changing a pair of clothes.
It's not. It's not. It's a lot of people just say, well, act this or act that. Can you stop being this? And it's just like, well, no. This is me. This is how I am. However, the only case in which I can never say this is who I am, live with it, is toxic personality traits. That's the only thing you can do. Like, you can only improve yourself when you don't say, this is who I am, deal with it. But with me being gay, with me being non-binary and stuff like that, I can't change any of that. I can never change any of that because that is me. Yeah. That is my identity. But no, how we essentially fetishized the war, especially with that bulldog spirit, because we were always like, because during the war, community was a very big thing. We got through rationing, we got through the Blitz. As a community, we stuck together. We don't have that anymore. We've never had that. And it's interesting in the case of, we recall that nostalgia. And when a lot of people were talking about Brexit and how hard it would be, they always said, well, we did this during the war, so we can do it again. No, we can't.
We can't.
There is nothing we can do, because we live off of the fund of nostalgia, because it should have brought us together. And like you were talking about, like fascism and stuff like that, only reason that is still alive and it's well is because it brushed up, it got a new suit, it got new shoes, it's now wearing a tie, and it talks through a very different lexicon than it used to. And through that, because it's educated now, it has been welcomed through the doors of Parliament and through the doors of Congress with a handshake and a hug, essentially, because it seems educated. And people are now saying, well, it's an opinion and stuff like that. It's really not. We built up a personality, both Britain and America, of fighting fascism only to let it through the front door, because it is now dressed in a suit and talks in an educated manner.
It's that quote of, it's just an opinion, that gets me in a lot of cases.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
Because an opinion is an opinion, but if your opinion is that someone should not have their basic human right, one that I hear a lot from even some people around me, and that I won't call names, that they're very much a case of, I don't get why they won't have, like, I'm talking from a kind of their perspective, I don't know why gay people, black people, want us to give up our rights. Now I'm sitting here as also a straight cis white man like these people, and going, I'm not giving anything up. I'm not as what I am. I'm not losing anything by you being allowed to walk through the streets and not be murdered. You're just getting the ability to be treated like a human, which is the very bare minimum of what you deserve. Like, we've just come out of Pride Month, and the amount of hate posts that I see going around about Pride. And I sit here going, no, it's like with Britain fetishizing its war victories and that. Like, the LGBTQ plus community deserve the right to celebrate and be happy about even the smallest victory that you can grab onto right now. And that's very much what Pride is. It's not a, hey, here, let's whatever ridiculous thing the next person wants to say it is. It's a celebration that you guys are one step closer to finally being treated the way you deserve.
Oh, definitely. And it literally leads into our next point of queer activism. And I'm glad you brought that up, Pride, actually, because people have to remember Pride, though it is a celebration, it began as a riot.
Yeah.
It was a revolution because June 28th, 1969, a mafia-owned gay bar was raided by the police. And this was for the it was the World Festival, so New York had to clean up its act, and essentially it was cleaning the stables, i.e. getting the gays out. And then when the police raided the Stonewall Inn, it was just a couple of days after Judy Garland, the gorgeous Judy Garland had died. And when they raided, someone then said, "I'm not taking this shit anymore." And someone threw the first punch. They threw the first brick. And people say it was Marsha P. Johnson. However, no one really knows. However, I will never take that away from her. She is pride icon. I love her, and she deserves her place in history.
All that matters is someone finally had enough.
Someone finally had enough. And it lasted for several days. I believe yesterday was the last day of the riots.
That's insane.
They lasted for quite some time. And the story that everyone was at is that they started fighting the police. They didn't start fighting the police. They actually barricaded the police inside the bar. They wouldn't let them out until they let their friends go. And there was a line of drag queens, of whom Marsha P. Johnson was one, actually, and they were singing "We Are the Stonewall Girls." And it started a movement called Liberate Christopher Street.
Right.
And since then, and then in 1970, it was the first Pride Parade. And it was the first time that queer people literally said, "I've had enough," and they fought back. This surprised everyone. Queer activities going on beforehand. There had been marches in Los Angeles. There had been stuff in Washington. There had been stuff all over the US. It wasn't until we started fighting back, when we proper fought back, that everyone was just like, gasp.
Yeah.
And it shocked the world. It shocked the world. It really did. And that's what started the Pride movement as it is. And LGBT persons have... A lot of modern LGBT people actually don't know this. Because I've actually heard a lot of people say, "What's the point? It's over. That's the past." And I always say, well, when you forget your past, you run the risk of it happening again.
Ergo fascism.
Ergo fascism.
One thing that I like to respond, because again, I'm an ally of the LGBT.
And you're a great ally, and I love it. I love it.
Not being part of it, when people come to me and are like, "I don't understand why people say, I don't know why you would celebrate this, like with your friends and that." And I sit there and just, one of the main answers that I always come out with, especially in Britain, is, why do you still celebrate England winning football in the 60s? And it's a massive thing, because people still are like, we did this one thing in the 60s, and it's like, yeah, you kicked a ball into a goal several times. And I mean, no shade at all to the players who, athletic feats here and there, like football players are immense. But at the same time, in comparison to a life of degradation and discrimination, I feel like you guys had a much bigger victory in 69 than England did in football.
Yeah. And though regardless of that victory, things didn't get better until a lot later. Because we then had to suffer, actually everyone, not just the LGBT community, but we were blamed for the AIDS crisis.
Which was unfair, for one, because it would never have happened had straight people not been assholes.
It would never have happened if governments actually pulled their finger out and did their job. Because it wasn't until Rock Hudson in 1986, until he was publicly dying of AIDS, that the governments actually decided to do something. And it was Larry Kramer, a novelist and an activist, who started a movement called ACT UP. And it was all about getting funding from the governments in order to research AIDS and develop cures, and to research and to see what they could do. And Larry Kramer got into a lot of bust-ups with someone who, in America quite recently, has become the face of medicine, a Dr. Fauci. And Dr. Fauci, I believe, dragged his feet a lot during the AIDS crisis. And it
That
wasn't
explains
until
why I hear a lot of people, right? I almost, when his name comes up, I've seen a lot of people almost recoil, and it's like, again, that I come from a little small village in the valleys. If there's a man that's uneducated about world knowledge, it's me.
no. And
So I've always wondered why people kind of had
yeah.
that reaction. At least now I know.
And it took ages and ages. It took 7 years for Ronald Reagan to even mention the word AIDS. And by then it was already too late.
Yeah.
Because a substantial amount, I believe, upwards of 10 million.
It was a massacre.
It was. And we were blamed. Like, you had all these repulsive adverts. And like, it was called Grid. It was called Grid to begin with. It was gay-related immune deficiency.
You don't have to be gay to get it.
Exactly. And most of it was actually passed on through blood. Blood transfusions. Now, there's an investigation in Britain into all of that.
Yes,
so I believe the youngest person to die of AIDS was one at the time in Britain through a blood transfusion.
Yes,
because it was to treat haemophilia. And if anyone has more information on that, please do comment on it and stuff like that. Please send more information. Education's the way forward. And if I am completely wrong, please do point it out to me.
With anything.
Thank you. But at that time, no one cared. It was just the gays.
Yeah.
No one cared. And it wasn't until a Hollywood icon was publicly dying that everything changed. And then you had artists, a filmmaker and a writer, actually. You might have heard of him, Derrick Jarman.
The name definitely rings a
Now,
bell.
he made a film called Sebastian.
Right.
And he was also, I believe it was it Richard II? Edward II. That's what it was. It was Edward II. And he made these very amazing, very homoerotic films. You might actually recognise some of his music videos that he done for the Pet Shop Boys. He did a music video for It's a Sin. And he did, I believe it was called Heart. I believe that was the song. Ian McKellen played a vampire, and it was glorious. But no, he was very publicly dying of AIDS. And he published his 2 journals, one in 1993 and then in 1994, which is Modern Nature and Smiling in Slow Motion. Smiling in Slow Motion was the last book he published, because sadly in 1994 he passed away. And he said in that book, in one of his journals, may you have a better read the cares of this world that I have locked in these pages, and may you have a better future. Set this book aside and love. And remember that we loved, for when the night closed in, the stars came out. And I read that quote. It's actually on the wall. It's stuck on a tack on the wall beside my desk. And every time I read that quote, I cry, because the AIDS crisis was tragedy in itself. And there are so many accounts. There's a fantastic book by a writer who had died of AIDS not long after this book had come out. It was called And the Band Played On. Highly recommend it. It's a contemporary history of the AIDS crisis. As it was happening. Literally from the first case that appeared in the 70s all the way up to the 80s, and just before the writer died.
Wow.
And it was heartbreaking. It was definitely heartbreaking. But our queer activism now, I become very frustrated with it these days. Mainly because I find that the minorities are fighting amongst themselves when they really shouldn't. They really should not be fighting amongst themselves, because we all face a common problem. We all face a common problem, and that's patriarchy, essentially. Patriarchy has set the rules of what it is to be a person in modern Western society. And also in Eastern society as well, most prominently in the Asian countries, like in China, when when such culture is honor bound, and the man is seen as the ruler of the family, he's the head of the family. It's a very patriarchal society.
A prime example would be from my knowledge, because being in the animation community, Japan's quite a large part of what I do, and they've, I say recently, I think it was 6 months to a year ago, finally passed a bill that allows women into government.
Yes.
However, there is a clause in that that the woman is not allowed to speak. And that there is a prime example of, I mean, no shade to Japan, they are progressing, which is fabulous. Everyone would like progression to happen at a faster pace, but that could be said around all the world. Britain is not perfect.
Exactly.
Sure.
But to note on that one, I do apologise.
No,
Britain recently got rid of its conversion therapy. It didn't.
Oh, the conversion therapy. I was sitting there just going, wait.
Yes. Britain.
Gears are taking forever.
Yeah. Britain said it got rid of its conversion therapy. It hasn't. It's only put in loopholes for certain circumstances. Okay. So that way, all you have to do is some shady business and you'll get someone into conversion therapy. So it's become protected by certain loopholes in law, but publicly it's banned. Yeah. It's and Britain itself has a lot to answer for with its queer community, namely Alan Turing.
Yeah.
Alan Turing and Oscar Wilde and countless others.
I mean, even I know that he's probably the most cliche person to bring up with this kind of thing, but Freddie Mercury is another victim of, MTV and that from America definitely did their part to drive everything worse, but Britain, again, it was very much, again, lax policies, waiting around, being like, oh, it doesn't affect me, so it's not a problem. Yeah.
And, yeah, definitely, and Mercury, a victim of the AIDS crisis, a victim of homophobia, but he was very vocal. I believe he had a bit of a fight with Sid Vicious.
That would not surprise me from what I've heard. Sid Vicious had a fight with everyone.
Oh, no, and I believe Sid Vicious had called them faggots. Mercury and a couple of his friends, they called them faggots, and then Mercury turned around and said, oh really, Sid Ferocious, and Vicious did not like it at all, and I thought it was the most glorious thing on the planet. But quite recently,
go Freddy.
Yeah, I believe it was as recently as 2016, 2017 that historical crimes of a gay nature had been pardoned, and Alan Turing himself had been pardoned. Again, but it's not enough. Because
it's well and good to retroactively be like, oh, you're pardoned for what used to be a crime. But
exactly.
The people alive today who are still suffering.
Exactly. Because Alan Turing, as you said, he actively saved millions of people and halved the war by 2 years. He shortened the war by 2 years, and yet when he was a war hero, but when all that was done, his status was stripped. He was told he should either take a chemical castration treatment, or he would go to prison. And I believe he was neurodivergent. He was neurodiverse. I believe that's the case.
Or I believe it's theorized.
It's theorized that he was neurodiverse.
Neurodivergency is still something that is
exactly and
barely being accepted.
I know. I'm talking as someone who is neurodiverse. It's gross. But no. And can you imagine someone neurodiverse and queer in a prison? Horrible place.
I mean, prison's terrifying as it is. So.
Exactly. But then again, as we all know, the law is no basis for morality.
This is true.
Yeah, the law has never been a basis for morality, because the law allowed slavery to be a thing. It allowed the Holocaust to be a thing. It allowed selling off your daughters to be a thing into marriage.
That is terrible.
Exactly. And in a lot of ways, in certain countries, it still happens. We see the Western society sees itself as perhaps the most civilized of all. It's underneath this.
We're civilized if we don't look at the, several hundred indigenous cadavers that are getting uncovered all
Yes,
around
in
the
Canada.
world that we caused.
And I do believe, actually, in Canada,
Yeah.
the statue of Queen Victoria has been torn down.
Yes, I heard
because
that.
in a private school, I believe, several hundred indigenous individuals have been uncovered. And I find this a horrifying thing, and and as a white person, it shocks me because that is my legacy.
Yeah.
That was my legacy. That is what my ancestors did, and there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do to make reparations for that, because how can you make reparations for a lost life?
Yeah, there's nothing that we could do to fix to anywhere near fix the mistakes that we've done. And
absolutely not.
It is what we've done. Like, I hear so many people being like, why are black people still upset about slavery? Why are people still upset about this? And it's like, because we took away so much from so many people, and the problem isn't the fact of that, we even, there are people out there that refuse to give it back, but the unforgivable thing about the acts done wasn't the fact that there are still people today that refuse to give it back. It's the fact that people that want to don't know how, because we've been raised in a society where we are told, or we're raised in the idea of we shouldn't have to because we don't owe anything. And then you look at what our ancestors have done and go, no, this was wrong, and I wish that this could be fixed.
And we do, and 400 years of slavery, there is no apology for that. But even then, the man responsible, especially in America, the man responsible for such terrible, terrible things is actually Abraham Lincoln himself, the man who freed them.
Interesting.
Because, well, maybe things could have changed had he not been killed in the Ford Theatre on April 14th, 1865. But no reparation and no provision had been made for any person of colour that was a slave, that had just been released. Nothing was done in order to help people. So you free the slaves, and now you've got millions upon millions of displaced persons
no idea
who
what
have
to do.
no idea what to do. Some of them don't even have names.
Yeah, that's terrifying. Imagine going your whole life without a name.
And
I'm taking this for people who have like writers' names.
Yeah, we have writers' names. Like, a white person is privileged even if they don't feel it.
Yeah,
like even a poor person who has lesser privilege still have the privilege of the color of their skin.
Well, exactly. Again, I may have been in a not very well off family, but again, I never had to. I mean, my grandfather was a police officer, and I grew up surrounded by the police, so I never, I would never know what it's like, or actually until recently, would never have known what it's like, or have entertained the idea that the police could be bad, because I have that privilege. I was born into that existence of, why would I have to worry? My skin color doesn't make me a target.
Exactly. And actually brings us on to the next point of Black Lives Matter. And we're talking about slavery. There is a book out there. It was the winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. It was by Toni Morrison. It's called Beloved. And it is about a woman called Setha, who, near the end of the Civil War, had to make perhaps the most terrible choice a mother would ever have to make, that a white woman, a white mother, would never have to make. And we learn this in the first few pages. Setha is being haunted by the ghost of her dead child, Beloved, a 2-year-old. Setha killed this child because the slave hunters were coming after her. She escaped from a plantation in Kentucky across the Ohio River and into Ohio, and the slave hunters came after her. And Setha made the decision of, these kids are better off dead than going back into slavery, because essentially it's described in the book that her eyes become two black wells that do not reflect firelight because the steel of them had been punched out of them. And Setha goes through horrendous treatment. She's beaten, she's raped, she goes through hell and high water only to have hell come after her. These demons come after her. And she makes the decision of, these children are mine. And I will do what I like. I will do what I feel is necessary to save them. And she kills Beloved. And she's haunted by the child because the child does not understand. The child was 2 when she died.
Yeah.
And Setha tries to make her understand, and all Beloved can say is, you left. So it's all, and trying to make a child, a ghost, understand why Setha did what she did.
Well, even...
you can't explain that away because it's very much, when Beloved was published, it was an extraordinary turning point. You can never think, once you read it, you can never look at slavery in the same way again. Yes, it was horrible, but when you read Beloved, it's terrifying. It's beyond anything you've ever read. It's beautifully written, but it breaks you. It definitely breaks you.
It's so beautiful. It's effective.
Basically.
Yeah.
And it won the 1993 Nobel Prize. And she was the first African-American woman to do so.
And bravo to her.
And bravo to her. She sadly passed away in 2019.
Heart goes out to the family.
And the books are amazing. How people responded actually to Beloved when it won the Nobel Prize is everyone said, white writers actually said that it was a triumph of political correctness. The book isn't even that bad, that it was a fluke. And they all said, we hope this prize inspires her to write better books.
The fact she won that prize.
The fact that she won that prize in itself, when it was very much the domain of largely European white writers.
Yeah.
And even then, Beloved highlights a lot of things, and it highlights the history of Black America. And another writer, James Baldwin, most ardent chronicler of the civil rights movement, highly recommend reading his books. I believe I sent you a video of him. It was something from Going to Meet the Man, and how he was telling how the wretched of the earth, at one way or another, and one day, could be next Wednesday, it could be next Saturday, they will rise up and shatter the cobblestones upon which London, Paris, and Rome are built.
Yeah. Because
the party is over. The world will change because it has to.
Which I highly agree with.
Exactly, definitely. He said this in the 70s, and he is probably one of the best orators I've ever had the privilege of listening to, even just recordings.
Even like with the video that you had sent me of it, it was like I had no context as to who he was prior. Just listening to what he had to say, as someone who, I mean, I've always been a bit of a rebel anyway, and always have been not very happy with the establishment, but at the same time, listening to someone who has been undoubtedly downtrodden and put down his entire life, like, I can hits you. I feel like I cannot remember who the names were, but it very much hit me in the same way that the Chicago 7, one of the Black Panthers said to one of the leaders of the Chicago 7, "Are you doing this just to make Daddy angry?" And it almost, I understand how that character in the Chicago 7 felt there, because you see this person saying these words as someone who's been beaten down his whole life and go, these people don't just want a revolution. People don't just want change. They need it.
Like, everywhere needs change at this point in time, like ecologically, queer-wise, Black Lives Matter, because the horrible event that happened last year, George Floyd, heart goes out to the families and all. And even though the man who killed him is in prison, it is a shortened sentence. It's only 22 years. So it's a victory, but it's not a victory at the same time.
On top of that, the mess that family had to go through,
Exactly.
the almost, I mean, although even in the end, thankfully, it did come to a conviction of some kind, the court case, at least from Britain's point of view, was almost like a circus at points.
It was an
and it was
absolute
distressing to watch from even a moral justice point of view of just this man was an innocent man that was murdered. Why are you even questioning anything to do with circumstance in this? Like, if this was, if it was the other way around, in any circumstance, everyone would, without question, just sentence done, gone.
And it's the fact of he's a policeman. He is protected by certain laws, and he's protected by his own people. And this man murdered in broad daylight, literally. And poor George Floyd said, "I can't breathe." When someone says, "I can't breathe," you get off of them. You shouldn't even be kneeling on their neck in the first place, because that is murder. That is intent.
Like, watching that video.
That was horrifying. And I can't imagine how distressing it must be to have that film played over and over and over again for the African American community.
I can't imagine how the community felt.
Oh, God, no. Because that's essentially reliving trauma over and over again.
I feel like what undoubtedly, and again, anyone in the Black, African American, British, any community, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like probably what's the most irritating part about the George Floyd situation is it's distressing, it's frustrating, but the most frustrating thing is you're used to it. This happens all the time, and that's what makes it sickening, is that it's not a black man has been shot and killed, or a black woman has been shot and killed by a police officer. They've done that again.
And they continue to do it. It's the same with school shootings. It's almost bread and butter to the American way of life. And
But the British, again, as someone who grew up around police officers and that, even like some of the people that I knew growing up can, like, they'll look and just go, yeah, it's disgusting how common this is here as well. Because thankfully, again, it should never have happened. No situation where that should have happened. But it's also thankfully pushed, at the very least, some very good police officers and some very good people to even start looking at not only themselves, but the system that they work in, and start picking it apart. And we've had, like in Britain, we've had people finally getting freed after 50 years of incarceration for crimes they never committed due to a corrupt detective. And that is outstanding. And a song that very much, again, being the creative industries and a total audiophile, I have music on all the time. A song that I only recently realized, put together the music video and the song, but Foo Fighters' Pretender. It's not just a catchy tune. They're literally screaming at the police, "I know you want me to tell you that you're different, but when you look around, can you really say that?" And that's, in a way, imagine hearing every white person, every police officer turn around and say, "Oh, not all," even with women, that hearing men go, "Oh, not all men." It doesn't matter if it's not all of them. Even if it's not all of them, you need to turn around to the ones that are doing it
and say, "Stop."
Yeah. I'm not going to sit there in a group and let people be assholes. And the idea that, because you're not the one being the direct asshole, that doesn't fix it. You're sitting there watching people do these horrible things. You are just as bad.
Because, if one in every 9 men are a monster, and the other 9 do nothing, that's you are complicit in that. If you know and you do nothing, then there's no point in saying not all men, because at that time
it is. And for the victims, in a lot of ways, I mean, although I've never had any trauma quite as bad as any, rape or that, I have, I've got a lot of trauma to do with men and whatnot, and so it makes me perpetually scared of a lot of men, especially people my build or larger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, although again, it's a case of, I'm not scared of people with a male physiology.
Mm-hmm.
But on some level, I always will be,
Mm-hmm.
simply because of that trauma. So you can sit there and go, oh, well, not all men, and take offense if you want.
Mm-hmm.
But to the victim, even subconsciously, it is, because they have to worry, they have to panic. Again, with black people and police, it's not all police are assholes. But what if the one time they let down their guard it is?
Mm-hmm.
So you always have to stay on your guard.
Yeah.
And the fact we live in a world where you have to do that
Mm-hmm.
is terrifying.
It is terrifying, and like myself, I have experience of trauma of that kind. I was assaulted, and it was a gang of straight men, and it was the most horrifying thing because we all know what men are capable of, and they're capable of the most terrible, terrible things. But not just men; women are capable of it as well, and we've seen that throughout history. But women tend to be subtler. Like classic cases, like say the Victorian times, poison. It was poison. I believe, I can't remember who said it, but they said poison is the woman's weapon, whereas the bludgeon, the truncheon, the gun is the man's weapon. And but no, men are capable of terrible, terrible things. And yes, and as I say, not all men, but people have to realize that the 9 out of 10 men who are not monsters have to do something. They need to be involved. Otherwise, what is the point?
Exactly.
People are, men and women, non-binary folk, trans folk, they are screaming for support. They scream for protection, and no one gives it to them.
Yeah.
They need help, yet no one gives it to them because people just no longer care. They're not paying attention because it doesn't affect them, when really it does. Because now we grow in a society where everyone is suspicious of everyone. Like, I am incredibly intimidated by men. I'm incredibly intimidated by people in general, because when you look at it, the surface is usually it's fine. It could be gorgeous.
Yeah.
It could be sweet. It could be inviting. But when you look at the skull beneath the skin,
What's going on there?
What is going on can be monstrous.
Yeah.
And it's worse than anything you could ever read. It's worse than anything you could ever see or listen to, because that's when suddenly you look into a mirror and you see the truth.
And yeah, but leading on to our next thing, because again, to do with, machismo and that, a massively, I don't feel like it's controversial yet, but I feel like I'm waiting for the spark in the powder cake, and I do apologize for future people if this is the spark in that powder cake. Football in comparison to the creative arts and their treatment throughout the pandemic. Especially with the new laxing of pub rules, specifically around the World Cup final.
Oh, I could go on for hours on this because I am raging.
Well, you have 7 minutes.
Oh! Well, to begin with, football, why? Literally, why? Because we've seen the worst of these people. We really have. Because I know now I can trust a theatre goer more than I can trust a football fan, because the cases in Dundee, because Dundee is now COVID central, and in all of Europe,
that's terrifying.
It is terrifying, and they're all linked to football. Because people are going to football, more people are catching COVID. And now that England is taking off its masks will no longer be mandatory. It'll now be seen as a public responsibility. It'll be seen as an individual responsibility. And social distancing will be cut. Pubs, restaurants, all that jazz, social distancing will be cut. I'm expecting Britain to go back into lockdown at any time. And it sucks because I'm about to go into my second year of university. My first year was completely ruined. It was all done from my bedroom. It was all done from home. And everyone says, well, yeah, your first year is meant to be the most fun year where you get to know your classmates. I know none of my classmates.
Because it's all over screen, and especially as creatives like us.
Exactly. We bounce off that sort of thing.
Yeah, our entire existence. I mean, yeah, as an animation director, I could sit at home on my computer and animate as much as I like, and you could sit there and write at your desk as much as you like. But it's not the same as getting out there in the world and like going to the theater with friends and that, and seeing how other directors work, or how actors work or getting out into the streets. And I mean, even a regular walk down the street sometimes can end up sparking off an entire novel series or an entire TV series.
Exactly.
And it's a lot of that we're missing out on and are really suffering for. I mean, yeah, we can go out and about now, but it's even the industry itself is suffering due to so many restrictions that us as creatives understand that we cannot afford to lax them.
No.
Otherwise, our entire industry could collapse on itself.
Exactly. And I also find it interesting that the government focused more on football because it was seen as the norm and the money it brings in. And I think it's about 555 million or something, or 150 million. I can't really tell. But I know for a fact the theatre and entertainment industries contribute £111 billion to our economy.
Which is massive.
Which is massive. And Brexit and the pandemic and the government fucked the arts over. Theatre, like, I understand why theatres had to close. It was safer.
Yeah.
And there was also the streaming platform on YouTube for the National Theatre when they were broadcasting some of their greatest hits.
Again, bravo to the National Theatre.
Bravo to the National Theatre. Their performances were stunning, and I loved every single bit of it. And also The Show Must Go On, which were streaming live performances onto YouTube for free. You could donate if you wish, and there were things like The Phantom of the Opera, there was Wicked, there was Jesus Christ Superstar, there were all these great musicals that you could see at home that you couldn't see on stage.
We improvised, we made do.
We improvised. We are away from football, unlike football, the arts are a very versatile lot. Instead, we got fucked over and told to retrain. The Tory government told us to retrain and take different jobs. So essentially, they told us we are not viable, we have no worth. And they fucked over not just theatre, not just the entertainment industries, and the sound engineers and all the people that go into the backs of that backstage. Like my cousin, who's a sound engineer, I've worked with her, I sang bits for her. They fucked over publishing, they fucked over galleries, they fucked over museums, they fucked over everyone.
And on top of that as well, one of the most largely affected, because I mean, us as creators sit there and we'll always find ways of putting our work into the world. That's what we do. We don't put our work into the world hoping for a return. We put our work out there because that's us putting our soul out there. It's how we exist, I guess.
Yeah.
But the problem, or how I feel the most harshly affected people, were the people that weren't able to see it.
Definitely.
The people that were locked down, the people that couldn't go to the theatre, the people that use these worlds of books, television, theatre.
It's their escape.
Yeah, it's their way of coping with, in some cases, a really horrific lifestyle. Again, sitting there in my room directing little stop motion things with Lego was my way of coping with trauma. And I got that from watching things like TV and like things that came up. And we've had such a bottleneck of that. Again, due to no fault of the creators, they have pushed and they have done beautiful things. But we've been so unfairly, in my opinion, restricted in comparison to things like football and that, where it has been given so much leeway. And a reason that, again, you know, the players in that, outstanding athletes through and through, not a single bit of shit at use. Again, the managers, wonderful strategists and that. The problem, and again, some of the fans are lovely people. The problem that I have is that the 1998 Creative Industries Act includes football.
Yeah. Football is not a creative activity.
Yet
it is a sport.
And yet it was given leeways that the rest of the entire creative industries wasn't.
And to follow up on that point, actually, footballers, when they were scoring goals, at the height of social distancing, they were still hunching, hugging, and all that sort of stuff, being the lads. And when the government said, you have to not do that, no one did it. No one even paid the slightest bit of attention because their excuse was, oh, the adrenaline's pumping and stuff like that. I get that, but still, you have to remember you have a responsibility now.
Yeah.
Not just to play a game, but also to keep people safe. And the amount of times I've heard of footballers testing positive to COVID-19, it's astounding. It's becoming frustrating. And now, with football opening up, more stadiums about to be filled, we are going to see spikes. And all the government have said is, we have to now live with COVID-19
as if it's the flu.
Exactly. And all that screams to me right now is, some of you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Hello, 2020.
Exactly. It feels...
As someone that, like, I mean, I appreciate that it is very difficult for the NHS, for doctors, and again, my heart goes out to every single one of you because
Exactly. Thank you.
I can't imagine the strain every single one of you is under. My father and my father-like figure of a friend, both of them work, and even my aunt, all work for the NHS, and they have been under insane amounts of pressure.
And it's about to happen again.
Yeah, cases in that are so, like, hospitals are still packed.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, hearing the health secretary turn around and say that we'll just live with it like the flu. I am a man. The flu can kill. Even after getting the flu vaccine, I still have to be careful because the flu could be it for me.
Mm-hmm.
So hearing we're just going to have to live with a virus that was even more likely to kill me than the flu, which is impressive. Say we'll just have to live with it like the flu. That's horrifying. I've been hospitalized for weeks for the flu before, counting down the days till the Reaper comes kind of thing. The idea that there is a virus out there that is still constantly mutating, that is taking still hundreds of thousands of lives around the world every single day, I am terrified. But at the same time, I'm terrified for the families out there, all the people immunocompromised, people who have, any kind of disability or that could cause complication.
Mm-hmm. And it's also the people that have to live with long COVID as well.
Yes, because again, looking at that, again, as a lifelong asthmatic, I don't know what it's like to be able to breathe normally.
No, neither do I. I outgrew my asthma, but then it came back.
Yeah.
And now these days, with my hay fever these days, it has become such a struggle. I've never known my hay fever to be like this, even when I was a nipper. But I know, right?
I can't imagine having that having the ability to breathe normally and have it stripped away.
And to also have these people in charge, this government, of not just Boris Johnson, but also with Matt Hancock or Dominic Cummings, being so irresponsible.
Yeah, that was...
At the height of social distancing. And they can't even stick to their own stories, which becomes really frustrating. With Dominic Cummings, it wasn't even an apology. All he said was, I wanted to test. I had COVID, so I moved a couple of 100 miles up north because no one could look after the kids while I self-isolated, which was bullshit in itself. And then he's like, oh, I wanted to test my eyes.
So why did you drive?
I know, you go driving. No, you go to an optician's to test your eyes. If your eyes were that bad, you could have hurt someone.
Yeah.
You could have hurt your passengers, your wife and your children. You could have also killed someone by knocking them over. So it was highly irresponsible, and now he's now put the cat among the pigeons. He's now taking all the shit out of the bag. And then there was Matt Hancock, or as I like to call him, Matt Wanksock.
Yeah, that was... I'm going to use a chess analogy here, because I was part of the chess club in high school.
Excellent.
I always played with a strategy, and was always made fun of the strategy. Except it was an effective strategy called the King's Gambit, in which you always play with the king at the front. And I never did it as a, strategy. It was always because that's the way I like to believe that leadership should work. If you are not willing to be the first to follow your own rules, to set an example, if you are not willing to put your foot out and be like, I will show you how to do this so that you can then follow me. It's go do this for me. I can't stand people who are like, go do this and I'm not going to. That's not a leader. That's a coward, in my opinion.
Western world is running very short on leaders. All it has got are essentially oligarchs at the wheel who have no idea what they're doing. Like the Tory party itself, it's not the Tory party. This Tory party is right. It is far righter than any Tory party we've ever seen. It actually doesn't even live by the standards of the original Tory party.
Which is somehow impressive, considering, as I'm going to use my aunt's quote here. So, what was it? Margaret Thatcher, the milk snatcher.
Yes.
That's what my aunt always called her.
Yes, and actually to bring back to
Out bad that?
I know. Someone who essentially sold off our coal industry and crippled an economy, and also bring it back to queer activism, actually, denied me my history.
Yeah.
And denied queer children their history in school, so it would be seen as you can't be seen to promote an alternative lifestyle than the heteronormative one. And it wasn't until 2001 that was taken away. But I still had no history. It was denied me because every teacher was expected to follow the rule of teach heteronormativity. So we had no queer sex education. We had no queer history. I learned all of this I learned all the stuff by myself, and I became I became angry because all these things had been denied me, and people can say I talk like a millennial, I talk like a snowflake, entitled and stuff like that. I am entitled to a history.
Yeah, everyone is.
I am entitled to know what other people are like me are like. I had no role models.
Have heroes.
I'm entitled to have heroes. I had no role models. I knew no one who was gay like me. I knew no one who was queer. It wasn't until I learned like Ian McKellen who helped me come out, and I even told him this when I met him at the rep, and he's such a lovely man. And we got the chance.
Wonderful man. Please come back to Dundee. You were amazing.
Yes, please. You were amazing. Telling him that, and it helped so much because then he became that shining light. And then I learned of other. Yeah, he became my hero. He was always my hero because he was Gandalf the Grey. Come on.
Yeah.
He was Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White. He was head honcho for me. And it was all these other people that I learned about, like James Baldwin. I learned about Truman Capote. I learned about all these queer people, mainly writers.
But still, it's people you can look up to. But
exactly.
I mean, it's like you even said, I hadn't noticed it until recently. With the education, the way that it doesn't teach. Like, I grew up in a very isolated village. There was very few people there. And in little town that I'm from, we are not taught about, like, we're not taught about being different, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like, we had bisexual people, we had homosexual people, I think even, someone's recently come out as trans and that, but they've always acted the opposite of what they were born as anyway. Mm-hmm. And no one ever cared. It was just oh, cool, so, it's her, it's she, her now. Right. Mm-hmm. Or, oh, hey, I didn't realize you had a boyfriend, man. Cool. Mm-hmm. It was normal for us to be raised around that until we hit high school. And then that's when it became, why are you doing that? That's weird. Now, we've gone from this little isolated village to suddenly being in the city, in the big world, and suddenly everything that we've grown up as kids knowing, it was, oh, but, why are you doing, that's weird. And it's like, how is it weird that he has a boyfriend? Is it not weird that you have a girlfriend?
I know, it's like your childhood, it's a relative privilege that you could be brought up in such an open and accepting sort of environment as a child, to then be chucked in the deep end, essentially.
To realise how, again, LGBT, black, trans, anyone, even women, are treated so... Again, horribly, and again, I was not treated bad, and probably will never be treated as bad. I mean, yeah, sure, my opinions of my clothing sense will get me beat up, but, I mean, that's why I learned martial arts. But the circumstance of my birth will always work in my favor in comparison to so many others, and that is not fair. The circumstance of my birth, and I think Michael Sheen recently said it best in an interview, is geography, circumstance of birth, color, that should not be what affect It's how you do.
Exactly.
And he was saying that in an interview about theatre and the creative arts.
Yeah, he was. And Michael Sheen, amazing human being. Absolutely love you.
Amazing actor.
If you're listening to this, Michael, absolutely love you, and I cannot wait for you and David to be in Good Omens too.
Yes.
Literally ineffable husbands. Absolutely adore it. Neil Gaiman, come to Dundee, please. We need to nerd out. But no, it's also the case. It actually brings me to what J.K. Rowling said, and it's the irony of this.
Mm-hmm.
She said, it is not who you are born as, it's what you grow up to be, which is ironic. It is very ironic because it also brings me to the last point, which is feminism. And feminism in itself, it's no bad thing. We need feminism.
It is amazing.
However,
in its core.
Yes, modern feminism, however, has become a bourgeois feminism because I believe it's what Angela Davis, who was black communist. You need to read her stuff. She's amazing to listen to.
I hope all of you realize that this is a reading list for me as much as it is you guys.
Exactly. And she stood up on a podium and she told about modern feminism, and her problem with modern feminism, it's my problem as well, is that it's a bourgeois feminism and it excludes a lot of women from its ranks because modern feminism actually privileges those who are already privileged. So a woman like J.K. Rowling, who claims herself as a feminist, but a very different kind of feminist, a very dark kind of feminist, who excludes a section of oppressed women, trans women especially, from their ranks.
Women are women, no matter how...
Women are women, it doesn't matter.
Yep. And men are men.
Exactly. Like, certain things obviously should be talked about. There needs to be a discussion because the best way you don't have, like, guillotinings and lynchings is when you're in the sweet spot in the middle where the pendulum hasn't swung too far either way.
Yeah.
You need that. And people need to realise, no, we need to sit down, we need to discuss these things in order to learn. However, J.K. Rowling's problem is the fact that she's not learning. A lot of the things that she's talked about, a lot of that stuff, no. Like, a lot of her research has a lot of holes in it. And her essay explaining everything felt like a bit of a slap in the face. And I will never decry the fact of she is a victim of abuse. Never. Absolutely. My heart goes out to her, as it does to anyone who has suffered abuse. Yeah. But just because your bigotry has a tragic backstory does not make you less of a bigot. Yes. It's still bigotry. Because her feminism, she's right up there at the top. She doesn't seem to realise that she's the most powerful woman in publishing. With the publication of Harry Potter, she became the most powerful woman in publishing in Britain, if not in the Western world.
I just kind of do some mental backflips there and went, oh yeah, I don't actually, other than maybe Stephen Meyer, I don't know pretty much any other female publisher that's been big in my lifetime.
Basically, yeah. And it's astounding. All she has to do, she's already at the ceiling. So it's called glass ceiling feminism. It's what Hillary Clinton was meant to represent. So she's already up there. She's touching the ceiling. All she has to do is push through, and she's there. She's already at the top. And yes, there is always sexism, which is the horrific thing. But her kind of feminism, it means nothing to poor women. It means nothing to working class women. It means nothing to women of colour, trans women of colour, trans women in general. It means nothing to them because they have to do such social and societal backflips and gymnastics in order to get to where they are. And yet this intersectionality, which feminism actually needs if it is to work, then there is no point in it being there, because if you can't have that intersectionality the same way intersectionality needs to exist in the LGBT community, because I cannot lie, there is blatant biphobia, there is transphobia, there is racism in the LGBT community, and it's heartbreaking and it just makes me feel that all of us, all these minorities, all the oppressed really should be ganging together in order to deal with the problem that actually assails us, and that is patriarchy in itself, which is what feminism is all about. It's
entire symbolism against the patriarchy.
Its entire symbolism is to be against the patriarchy. We need that because we now live in a toxicity, in a masculinity that is toxic.
Undoubtedly.
And we've always lived in that because we talk about success through the lexicon of violence and destruction. Like, you're killing it. You went in there, all guns blazing, make a killing. You blew it up.
Yeah.
So
even negatives in that, like you've blown it out of proportion.
Exactly. So when you use language like that, it is inevitable, as Ocean Vuong says, a fantastic Vietnamese American poet and writer. Definitely read their book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. It is astounding. He said that if we talk through that lexicon, it is inevitable that we arrive at a masculinity that is toxic. And basically, all these things, every minority should really be ganging together and revolutionising all the things that we said we would. We should be doing the things we said we would do, because right now we're fighting amongst ourselves, and it's exactly what the patriarchy want. Because essentially it's a case of, oh, we'll give them this, and then we'll give them this, and that way someone can be left out, and they'll fight each other for it, because
divide
apparently
and conquer.
it is exactly divide and conquer, which is perhaps the most dangerous thing to fall into. It's a dangerous trap, and it's exactly what people at the top want. It's what the oppressors want us to do, and that is to struggle against each other, fight against each other, so we don't realise what the real problem is.
Exactly. Right. Well, that is 15 minutes over, but I'm sure that anyone that's listening to us on the drive to work or is going to sleep, because both of us love to ramble.
Oh, we do. I love it.
Will, I'm sure that they won't mind, but yes, we're going to have to wrap up here. But no,
That's totally fine.
Yeah, this was definitely a first episode. We'll definitely get into more subjects next. Probably
Absolutely.
continue hitting controversies in that, and probably making some commenters very happy and included, hopefully, as much as I somewhat sadistically hope that I managed to irritate some people.
Oh, I love irritating people. Absolutely. If you're not irritating someone,
then you're not doing your job as an activist.
A day without argument is like an egg without salt.
Indeed. But yes, nonetheless, thank you all for listening, and
thank you for having me.
Yes.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
And we shall, if you have anything in particular that you'd like us to touch on, or if you would like a written down version of Ryan's reading list, because I'm genuinely thinking of putting that down in the comments, please do say, and we will bring it up as we go along. That's us.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.